We're going to practice working with conditional probability using the same contingency table that we used in the last video. So again, just as a quick reminder, we have the instrument that a certain musician plays, and then whether they were self-taught, whether they studied in school, or whether they received private instruction. So let's just hop right into an example. Find the probability that the musician was self-taught given that they played the guitar. Now, if I was to write this out, first of all, what this looks like is it would say, I want to know the probability that the musician was self-taught, given that they play guitar. That given kind of tells me what group I am choosing from. So in particular, when I'm talking about conditional probability, I oftentimes like to try and figure out what that denominator is, because that's going to help me figure out what is the group that I'm choosing from, and that'll help me narrow my focus for the rest of this problem. So I know that the individual that I have selected plays guitar, which means I am only looking at this highlighted row right here. I can ignore everything else in this table for this part of my problem, because I know I'm only considering the guitar players. And I say of those guitar players, first of all, I have 59 of those individuals. So I have 59 guitar players. And of those 59 guitar players, 19 of them were self-taught. So 19 out of 59. Let's see, 19 out of 59 gives me 0.3220 if I wanted to round to 4 decimal places. So you don't necessarily have to write it out in this notation, but I think sometimes it can be helpful when we're starting off, particularly to think about what is that group that I'm choosing from? What do I know is true about this problem? What do I know about this individual that I've selected? So let's look at another example. Part B says, find the probability that the musician played guitar given that they were self-taught. Now, if I look at this, I've kind of taken that and I've reversed it. I still see that word given right here, which is really helpful. I want to find the probability that they play guitar given that they were self-taught. So I know in this instance that the individual was self-taught. So that means I am only considering the individuals in the self-taught column. That is the only set of numbers that I care about. And for this problem, well, I had 33 individuals that were self-taught, and of those 33 individuals, 19 of them play guitar. So 19 out of a total of 33. So 19 out of 33 gives me 0.5757, repeating, would round to 0.5758 if I do 4 decimal places. So my probability looks a little something like this. Now, I'll mention quickly here, we do have a formula for conditional probability that I honestly haven't really used. If I wanted to, I certainly could do that. If I wanted to, and let me show that I actually end up with the same result. If I wanted to use that formula, I'm going to look at that same example that I just looked at here. The formula for conditional probability is the probability of A and B divided by the probability of my given event B. So I would need, first of all, the probability that they play guitar and were self-taught. So the probability that they play guitar and were self-taught, well, there were 19 of those individuals out of my total of 192. So 19 out of 192. And then divided by the probability of B, the probability of my given, that's this part, the probability that they were self-taught. Well, I had 33 of those individuals out of a total of 192. Now, if I divide these out, and if you're going to do that, be careful, make sure you use parentheses around these when you're using the calculator, you should end up with the exact same answer that you did over here. So both results should get you to the same probability, but I think that messing around with this formula over here on the left-hand side actually is a little bit more difficult and just a little bit more tedious than kind of narrowing that sample space and thinking about, okay, I'm looking at this particular row or this particular column. So you are free to use the formula, and there are certain situations where the formula, yes, is the only way we can do the problem, or it is an easier way to do the problem. But just because we have the formula doesn't mean we always have to use it. Let's look at another example down here. So next example, it says, if the musician was self-taught, find the probability that they played guitar. Now, this one's tricky because I don't see that word given. And this is what makes conditional probability in particular pretty challenging for a lot of students, is that there are a lot of different ways that I can phrase either the same question or a different question. I can just phrase these conditional probabilities in so many different ways. So what I want to think about is, what do I know about this individual? Do I know the individual is self-taught, or do I know that the individual played guitar? This says if the musician was self-taught. So that means if they are self-taught. I know that I am talking about a self-taught person, which means that is my given. So the probability of, given that they're self-taught, self-taught. And then the other part is, well, what's the probability that I'm looking for? In this case, the probability that they played guitar. That's my first part. So the probability that they play guitar, given that they're self-taught. And this is actually the exact same question that I gave for part B. I've just chosen to rephrase it in a different way. So that's what makes, I think, probability in particular a really challenging topic for students, is you have to read very carefully. Reading is going to be an extremely important skill for us in this section. So because I'm asking for the same probability, it should be the exact same as last time, 19 out of a total of 33, or 0.5758. Let's move on. We've got just a couple more to take a look at in this video. Part D says, what is the probability that we select a self-taught guitar player? So again, I need to think about, what do I know? Who am I choosing from? So in this case, a self-taught guitar player. Do I know that the individual is self-taught? Well, no, because I want to potentially select a self-taught individual. And do I know that they play guitar? Not necessarily. I want to find that as my probability. So this is actually kind of a trick question, because it's not a conditional probability. This is actually an and probability. I want to find the probability that they are self-taught and played guitar. So if it's an and probability, I'm considering out of my total sample size. So out of my total of 192 individuals from my survey, so out of 192, how many of them are both self-taught and play guitar? Well, there are only 19 of those individuals, 19 out of 192. So 19 out of 192, grab my calculator real quick, gives me 0.0989, would round up to 0.990 to 4 decimal places. So it should look something like that. Last question, let's take a look at one more here. Part E says, suppose that a musician studied in school. What is the probability that they played piano? So, okay, a different set of events that I'm considering. Again, I want to think about, what do I know? Do I know anything about this individual? Well, this says, suppose that they studied in school. I know that this person studied in school, which means that's my given. So, given that they studied in school, what is the probability that they played piano? So, I want to know the probability that they played piano if they studied in school. So, scrolling back up one more time, I know that the individual studied in school, which means I'm looking at this row, and this is this column. And this column is the only thing that I care about. So I have a total of 95 individuals. 95 individuals that studied in school. So out of the 95 people in my survey that studied in school, how many of them played piano? Well, we have 38 individuals that played piano. So 38 out of 95 gives me, 38 out of 95 gives me 0.4, just 0.4 on the button, so that's nice. So as you're working through these problems, take your time. Yes, these end up being short problem once you kind of figure out what the problem is asking you to find, but don't fall into the trap of, I'm going to work through these problems as fast as I can, because you need to go slowly to make sure you understand what the question is asking you for before you can begin to answer that question.